To start this project, we're going to work on some 8-inch 6mm size 10 double pointed knitting needles, and then we're going to move to a 16-inch circular needle. To start, we're going to create a large slip knot, and we are going to place that slip knot on our first needle. I like to hold the tail to make sure that I know where it is. Now, into this slip knot, we're going to work a knit. And then we are going to bring our yarn to the front and work a purl stitch. Not dropping the slip knot off the needle. Now we're going to move our yarn to the back and we're going to work a knit stitch. We're going to move our yarn to the front and work a purl stitch. Move our yarn to the back and work a knit stitch. Yarn to the front and purl. Yarn to the back and knit. Yarn to the front and purl. Yarn to the back and knit. Yarn to the front and purl until we have 12 stitches on the hook. So we have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we're going to knit one more and purl one more. Starting to get a bit tight, which is why we start with that big wide open slip knot. All right, now we have 12 stitches on the hook. I'm going to tighten that slip knot just a little bit, and we are going to move these onto 3 double pointed needles. So we will slip 4 stitches onto one needle. Now we are going to slip 4 stitches onto another needle. All right, I'll leave the other 4 stitches where they are. We have got our working yarn here, and we're going to be working into these. So I'm going to turn the whole project over. Move this tail to the back. And now we have a nice big open circle. We've got our working yarn right here. Doesn't need to be in front of this. We've got 4 stitches with our working yarn. We have 4 stitches with our tail. So that is where we're going to be working. So now we grab our 4th needle, our working yarn. When you're working as if to knit, You keep your needle just like you would and your yarn just like you would if you were still using this one. So I kind of lay it with that one. That's one way to tell where your yarn and needle are supposed to be. So now we work into this stitch to knit, and we're gonna knit around, making sure not to drop those stitches off of those needles and kind of just ignore them for now. Knit. All 4 stitches from this needle. Now, to know which ones to work next, you just look for your circle in the middle and find the next one that's right next to it without any twisting. I'm also going to place a stitch marker on that very first stitch I worked on this needle, because that marks the beginning of the round, and that will tell you when you are done with each round. All right, so working as if these needles were the same, coming into this stitch to knit. We'll knit those 4 stitches off of that needle. All right, we've got them. Now if we need to figure out where we are knitting next, we just look for our circle. So the next part of our circle is right here on this needle. We'll bring those stitches up, act as if these are the same needle, and knit the stitches off of this needle. All right, that is round 1 completed. We can spread the stitches across the needles, and you can see that we have started our round. All right, so now to do the second round, we're going to take out the beginning marker, and now we're going to knit into this stitch, but first we need to do a yarn over. And so we just put the needle under the yarn and go into the stitch as if to knit, knit it, and slide it off, and you will see we have a yarn over and a knit 1. We're gonna yarn over and knit 1 again, yarn over and knit 1, yarn over and knit 1. All right, I'm gonna place that beginning of round marker back. Now, figuring out where we're working into, just look at our center circle and see the next stitches are here. So we need to yarn over and then go into this stitch and knit. And that gives us our yarn over knit 1. We do it again, yarn over knit 1. You can mostly just ignore the stitches on your other needles other than to make sure they're not falling off. I really like the bamboo needles for that because that gives a little bit more resistance to the stitches sliding. we just focus on the 2 needles we're working with. And once we have them, we find our next needle we need to work with. That's going to be this one. I'm going to slide the stitches to the end. You can slide other stitches on other needles closer to the center. And again, we're going to yarn over, so we just put the yarn over our needle and knit into that stitch. And move that one out of the way so you can see. And you've got a yarn over and a knit stitch. Yarn over and knit. Yarn over and knit. Yarn over and knit. And there we have round 2. We can kind of see it coming together. Knit round 3. We're just gonna knit all the way around. So we will take out our marker, act as if this is just the same as that needle, going in here and knit. I like to do a few stitches before placing the marker back in, just so I make sure that they're not falling off the needle. So place the beginning marker back in, and we're going to knit all the way around. Alright, that finishes round, I think that was 3, yeah, round 3. So we're going to move on to round 4, which is an increase round. We're going to start with some knit stitches, just like we've been doing. Alright, so this round starts the beginning of our pattern repeats. So we're going to do an increase stitch here called increase 2. We insert this stitch into the hook, yarn over, but we don't drop this loop off yet. What we're going to do is yarn over and knit into this stitch a second time. So this is an increase 2. We go from 1 stitch to 3. So we've increased by 2. And then we're going to knit 1. And this is the beginning of our pattern repeats that are each of our petals. So we're going to go ahead and add a stitch marker to divide between the pattern repeats. We'll do that again. Knit 2. Now we're going to increase 2. So we work into the stitch to knit, yarn over just like we were knitting, but we don't drop this loop. Instead we yarn over again and then do it again. Work into the stitch as if to knit, and now we have 3 where we did have 1. And we drop that loop off after that. All right, then we knit 1, and that is our first increase. We'll put our beginning of row marker back in to our first stitch, and we will move the next stitches to the end of the needle. we are going to knit two, knit two, and then we're going to increase. When I do these increase stitches, I like to make sure we're all the way up on the wide part of the needle, because you're turning one stitch into three, and that can be a bit tight. So I make sure that I come up to the wide part with my yarn over, and again with my second knit stitch. That way I've got plenty of yarn and it's not making it difficult to slide across the needles. Then we knit one. I'm going to place a marker for the pattern repeat. And do it again. So here's that increase two stitch, yarn over, and knit into the same stitch a second time. There we go. And knit one. I like to slide these stitches up a little bit, and we'll move the next ones we need to the end. We're gonna knit two. Increase two by knit, yarn over, knit into the same stitch, and then knit one and place a marker for our pattern repeat. I like to use all the same color markers for the pattern repeats and then a different color for the beginning of round. Our pattern repeat also happens where we change needles, and so when we switch to circular needles, we will add some stitch markers there as well. There are 6 pattern repeats. We've got our increase and knit one. That brings us back to the beginning of the round, and the next round is just knit all the way around. So bring our stitches up, take out our beginning of round marker, and let's knit. When knitting with these locking stitch markers, it helps to have them come to the front on a knit round and go to the back on a purl round, so they stay out of the way of your stitches and you don't end up with a great big yarn over where it's just trying to go around the stitch marker. Alright, we're back to the beginning of the round again. This next round is another increase round, and then we will be doing something different. As you get farther along, you can tighten up your slip knot at the center. There we go. Tighten up the slip knot for your center of your motif. All right, let's take the beginning of round marker out, and we're going to knit 3. Put the marker back in, and this is round 6. We're going to do an increase too. Then we're going to knit 2 and continue that around for the entire increase round. All right, we've finished round 6. Go ahead and move the stitches up and get ready for round 7. At this point, there should be 8 stitches per pattern repeat. When moving the needles through these stitches, it can be helpful to twist them when you've got the bamboo needles. It makes it a little easier to slide the stitches up the needles. So you'll see I'll kind of twist it as I push it through. All right, we've got 8 stitches per each repeat. Now we're going to go ahead and do a round of purl stitches. And so to do this, we're going to bring our yarn to the front of our project, just like if we were going to use this same needle. But we're going to grab our next needle to work onto, and holding it just like the needle we were working with, we'll come under this yarn. So we have the yarn in the front of our working needle, and then we're going to be able to start purling into this round, just like normal. All right, the round of purl stitches on this round and the next round start to create a transition from the center of our flower motif into the outer petals. That's because these flowers were inspired by daffodils. This pattern message was inspired by the book The Secret Language of Flowers by Vanessa Diffenbaugh, and is actually part of a knit along and read along that is sponsored by expressionfiberarts.com. I'll add a link over in the description to the read along and to the yarn that was used for this blanket. So we go ahead and keep purling across to create that nice definition on the stitches. The daffodil in The Secret Language of Flowers is said to represent new beginnings, and my hope is that in making this blanket, in joining this knit along, you can focus on some of the new beginnings in your life and have this moment of meditative crafting where you just bring that positive energy and focus into your life. Now, as we get across this row, I'll show you once again how to line up the needle to start purling on the next needle. Alright, so we've finished with this needle. And the yarn's all ready to the front where we need it. So we just line up our new needle underneath the yarn. Oh, there we go, underneath the yarn so that it is parallel with the needle we just finished working. That just helps when you're getting used to double pointed needles to really see where you need to put the needle and where you need to put the yarn. Alright, we're going to go ahead and purl across, and I will see you for the next round. Alright, we've finished round 7. And we're going to move on to round 8, which is a purl round, but with increases. So we bring our needle in to purl, putting the yarn in front of it. And we're going to purl 4 stitches. And 4. All right, now I'm going to put my beginning of round marker back in, and we're going to move the yarn to the back. That's the important thing on this row. You're going to do an increase 2 by doing knit 1 and then yarn over and knit 1 again into that same stitch. Just like the increases we've done on other rows, you just have to make sure to bring your yarn to the back to do it on this row. And then once you've made your 3 stitches, bring the yarn to the front, and then we're going to purl. And there will be 3 stitches to purl before the marker for the next petal, and then we'll repeat that again for the next petal. We'll go ahead and purl 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then we'll move that yarn to the back to do our increase. Okay, so we knit, yarn over, and knit into that same stitch again to increase. And we're going to move our yarn back to the front, and we're going to purl 1, 2, 3. And that's how we do the increase purl round. Come underneath the yarn to purl. Purl 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then move that yarn to the back to do the knit increase. Knit, yarn over, knit into the same stitch. And then we bring the yarn back around to the front, and we purl 3. And you just keep doing that until you're all the way around, and then I will show you how to transition into the petals. As we get to the end of round 8, we're actually done with the center color of our motif, and we're going to switch colors now to the petal color. So we can go ahead and trim the yarn for our first color, leaving a tail to sew in, and we can find our new color. Now this first stitch of the round, we'll take out the stitch marker, and the first stitch is actually a purl stitch, so we're still going to come in under the yarn to work that first stitch. Now as we're adding the new color, we need to be able to come in under the new color. So I like to put it here with the first color as if we were going to use them both, just to see the easy way to know where the yarn is supposed to be. Then we go ahead and drop the first color and just purl with the new color. And now we're going to knit across to the next marker. I'm going to place a few stitches, and then I'll show you how I like to deal with the tails while I am still knitting, so that they're not getting all loose. I find that the tails, if left to themselves, will cause the tension near those stitches to get very loose. So I knit a couple stitches, and then I take both of my tails and I do a box knot. A box knot is similar to a granny knot, but a little less likely to slip out. So I go ahead and tie those two tails together, and that just helps to keep the tension even while I'm working this round. When I get around to when I finish the motif, I will go ahead and untie that knot and sew in the ends. So we knit over to the marker, and I'm actually going to just pull those tails to the back of the work so that they're not in my way. And when we get to our next pattern, we're going to pull the stitch marker to the front so the yarn doesn't get tangled on it. We're going to bring the yarn around to the front, and we're going to purl this first stitch. These single purls followed by knit stitches help to start the definition, separating the individual petals. So we knit across, and that is the start of our flower petals. Just like before, when we're lining up to work into the next needle, we're going to line it up as if it were the first needle. We've got to move the yarn to the front to purl. We put our needle under it and then just purl into this first stitch, and then knit across to the marker, and we're going to keep doing that all the way around. All right, we've finished round 9. Now we can go ahead and work a few rounds, and then I will show you how I transition from the double pointed needles to the circular needles on row 12. All right, we're at round 12 and ready to move on to the circular needles. So we'll take our beginning of round marker out, and we're going to take our circular needle and we're going to use it to start just the same way as we would another double pointed needle. But we're going to move all of the stitches onto it. I like to move onto the circular needles on this row because it's an increase row, meaning that we end up with more stitches on the circular needles than we're taking off of the double pointed needles. So to start the round, we're going to bring the yarn to the front and line up our needles together so that we can purl this first stitch. We'll go ahead and purl onto the circular needle, and now move the yarn to the back. To work this round, we're going to do knit 5 and then an increase 2 and then knit 5. And we're just going to work around, moving all of the stitches as we go onto the circular needles. So there's knit 4, knit 5, and now we'll do our increase stitch, which is knit, yarn over, and knit again into the same stitch. And then we're going to knit 5 more stitches to get to the marker, and we're going to repeat that. When we get to the end of that first double pointed needle, we can set it aside, and then we're going to grab a stitch marker because this is where one of our pattern repeats is. So we'll add the stitch marker, and then we'll continue working the stitches off of the next needle. Make sure to bring that yarn to the front so that we can purl into that first stitch. And we'll keep working the pattern across this needle. Alright, when we get done with this needle, we can set it aside. We will add a stitch marker for our pattern repeat, and we're going to go ahead and work the rest of our stitches off the last double pointed needle, bringing the yarn to the front to purl that first stitch and working across. Alright, once we get off of our final needle, we have all of our stitches on our circular needles here. It's a little tight at this point. We'll add that green marker for our beginning of round again, and I like to attach a second one just so that it hangs down and is a little more obvious. It visually gets in my way to remind me not to just keep repeating around in a circle. Once I'm on the circular needles, it can feel a little bit tight on this first round as after we move the stitches over, and by the end of the motif it's a little bit crowded, but I find that these 16-inch circular needles work perfectly to not have to continue changing needle sizes or the circular part sizes. So then we go ahead and purl, and we work our next round, round 13, on the circular needles. And we can continue working around until you've completed your full hexagon, and then you move on to make all of them to finish the blanket. Thanks for joining me. Bye.